Good morning, everyone. I'm Councilwoman Thelda Williams, joined by Vice Mayor Gallego, Councilman Gates, and Councilwoman Pastor. Um, We are calling the Transportation Infrastructure Subcommittee to order. First on our agenda is the approval or correction of the minutes for February 9th.
Move approval?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. Passes unanimously. Items 2 through 8 are for information only, but I do have a card on, well, first let me ask, anyone have any questions, discussion, comments? Okay, hearing none. Oh, pardon me, Councilman.
I don't, this doesn't say which item it is, sorry, trying to get used to this.
I know, it's new format.
Yeah,
It's,
suggestion we had to put what item number is in here. Let's see, it is 6. On item 6? This is the streets transportation 2050 maintenance of pavement. So, Madam Chair, just had a couple questions on this. Thank you for this. It's great to see, and I encourage people who are watching this to review all the different, I mean, this lays out where the different projects are proposed to be. And also there's a description, because it's one thing to say, okay, there's going to be work done, but it's another to say, what type of work is it? Because there are big differences between an overlay, for example, and a crack seal. And there's another process here called TRMSS. Ray, can you talk about that and what that would look like to for our residents if that type of work is done, as opposed to like an overlay?
Madam Chair and Councilman Gates, so we do have several types of different pavement treatments, and from the lesser type of treatments like crack seal, the micro seal and slurry seals, and then the tire rubber modified surface sealant, that's the TRMSS, is basically a emulsified asphalt that it's kind of in between a fog seal and a pavement, more of a pavement treatment. So it's a very thin layer of basically painting the road to kind of keep that preservation of that road, and so it's very light. It's for roads that are starting to oxidize, and they need some level of treatment, not an overlay, but not a crack seal. So it's a very light, basically a paint that goes over the pavement.
And I assume that how would you describe the color?
It still would be a black
Okay.
top.
Okay, so it would look like it would certainly be a noticeable
Yes.
to the residents.
Yes.
And improve the ride, or not?
No,
not
it's
so
more,
much?
it wouldn't totally change the rideability.
Okay.
I mean, it would kind of keep the same rideability that it has. And just to add, it's this treatment, we haven't had this treatment in quite some time. And because of the new funding that we have, it's just another treatment to treat our roads in a better way.
So would an example be on Glendale between 7th Avenue and 7th Street? Where it's just, they look like veins and they're just sealed, and then you have them sealed this way and sealed that way.
Madam Chair and Councilwoman Pastor, actually, that's a crack seal.
Okay,
And that's
so
more
it
of
is
a,
seal.
so
Okay.
it's another form of trying to preserve the integrity of the road. And then following that, ultimately, we would do a more intensive pavement treatment to that.
Okay.
Ray, how long does the process last?
Madam Chair, all of these have a certain time frame. Typically, these, like from a crack seal, it could be a couple of years. The TRMSS, it has some longevity, but I think it's also trying to make sure we're spreading all the funds across the whole city with regards to our pavement treatment. So some of them don't have a lot of longevity. Obviously, an overlay will have the longest
Right.
longevity. So these are, have, I would say, between 2 to 5 years. but it's small depending on how, what happens with the roadway as time progresses, because we're always reevaluating the roads as we go through the whole city.
What's the comparable cost between that and the next step up?
Well, the highest one, Madam Chair, and the highest one is the overlay. That's around 700,000 to 800,000 roughly. These smaller ones, I don't have the exact number, but it's probably less than 100,000 on a mile stretch. So it just depends, like crack seal, it's much less than doing an overlay per se. And so those are a lot less, I would say between probably less than $100,000 to deal with a mile stretch of an arterial.
Thank you. Any other question?
Yes, Madam Chair, just, and again, just to be clear, we're not voting on this today. This is going to come back next month, so I appreciate the opportunity, because again, this is very granular here, which is good. And my comment as the District 3 representative is that I see 3 overlays on here that, to me, in my being a non-professional, but my opinion is if you, and I've said this before, but if you go down Thunderbird, going through Moon Valley over to I-17 seems to be in much worse shape than, so I'm not even pitting district against district here. I'm just talking about within my own district. I would be interested to get your thoughts on Thunderbird from like Coral Gables west over to I-17, and maybe, because I actually see Thunderbird on here, although I think it is for the TRMSS treatment from 7th Street to Cave Creek. My sense is even that stretch of Thunderbird isn't nearly as bad as Thunderbird to the west of Coral Gables. And then one other question I want to make sure, since I've got you here, on Coral Gables itself, I believe, my understanding, and again, this is just additional projects that we're looking at here, right?
Madam Chair and Councilman Gates, yeah, this is looking at the arterial side and
Right.
the major collectors.
So you do reference in here the residential street minor collector, which Coral Gables is a minor collector. I think that I was told that it's in the queue for the upcoming year, if I'm not mistaken, but maybe if you guys can check on that. I just want to make sure, because that was raised at a budget hearing last week. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Any other questions, comments? If not, we have a card on item 8. Marvin, did you want to make some comments on item 8?
Yes, I would like to. I'm not aiming this at Councilwoman Pastor. I'm aiming it at her father, who is a very nice gentleman. But I think we're getting shortchanged in our area, southwest Phoenix, Maryvale, by not getting the light rail that was promised to us in 2016 until 2030. I do realize in reverence that her father wanted to get it passed before he retires, but it is hurting our area tremendously by allowing the corridor, Central Avenue corridor, to be built long before ours. And I know Councilwoman Pastor is involved deeply in doing an excellent job in our area of town, and it just hurts, and I wanted to let that be known. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilwoman, I have a question on the water item.
Shirley, go ahead.
On the wastewater collection odor control update, it gives us an update on the SRO interceptor and the Southern Avenue interceptor odor control study. And we are glad for studying, but I think also interested in implementation and timeline.
Madam Chair, I have Patty Kennedy here with me, which is the Deputy Director of our wastewater engineering group, that can kind of give an update on the Southern Avenue.
Yes, so we did a study on Southern Avenue, both Southern Avenue and our SRO outfall on SAI interceptor. And what we did is we actually brought a company in that set up test areas where we looked at treating vapor phase treatments. So there are 2 ways that you can treat odors in the sewer system. One is through chemical addition, and the other is by taking the foul odors out and treating them in the vapor phase. So we set up a vapor phase treatment test areas where we looked at, if we were to set these up full scale, how far in the collection system can we actually treat the vapor phase? So we're now looking at those results. They were not as favorable as we initially thought. So we're going back through now and looking at, we knew that we were probably going to do a combination of vapor phase and chemical treatment. So now we're just going back through evaluating what exactly is that going to look like.
So we're looking at implementation maybe fall.
There's going to be design phase first, so probably implementation about a year and a half from now.
Thank you. Thank you both. That's it.
Any other questions? Okay, hearing none, we will go to item 9, proposed citywide traffic signal enhancements.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, item 9 has to do with citywide traffic signal enhancements. And here from the Street Transportation Department is Director Ray Dovalina and Bruce Littleton, Acting Deputy Director. This item went through the Citizens Transportation Commission about a month ago and received a unanimous approval. The item has to do with providing funding, which has been lacking for several years, at traffic signals and for the maintenance of key components of traffic signals, illuminated street signs, signal poles, and the painting and maintenance of those poles, and then left turn arrows. And so what staff is looking to do is look at improving the traffic flow and efficiency and the safety at these intersections, making sure that we're maintaining the infrastructure that exists along these transportation corridors, while also addressing, as you'll see in the presentation, some blighted looking infrastructure that needs to be dealt with. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ray.
Thank you, Mario. Madam Chair, and good morning, and committee members. I have Bruce Littleton here to go through the presentation regarding this.
Good morning, Madam Chair and councilpersons. And I'm just to give you some background in terms of our inventory. We have 1,117 intersections. Actually, it's now 1,120 as of this past week. 28 Hawks, 3 of which are in construction, 2 of which are in design. About 1,500 left turn arrows. And then we have other ITS devices at intersections, the rapid flashing beacons to get people across the streets, the CCTVs that let us monitor traffic, the radios that allow us to communicate from this building to all the intersections. So this is an extensive program that we need to provide maintenance for, and we have the staff and the funding for part of it, but it's been over the years woefully underfunded in terms of doing it all. So this is going to look at 3 programs to start to address some of those issues. In terms of the illuminated street signs, there's 3,900 signs approximately. The program started in 1999. What is important to note is when it was originally done, maintenance was provided under the contract that provided the signs, and it was done under third-party maintenance. That ended as a budget cut in 2007, and in essence, the signs have been essentially aging since then. They've got about a 10 to 15 year life, and you know the original design was they were lit with fluorescent light bulbs, which have about a 1 to 3 year life. The sheeting on the face of the sign has about a 10-year life. If we were to convert the internal illumination to LEDs, it would get about a 10-year life. Number of these signs have aged because they've become damaged and they're unlit. We can roughly serve about 10 to 20 a month with the resources that we have. And so we now have a backlog. About 2,000 of the 3925 signs are unlit or have damage, and those are the ones that we've logged that we know about. There are obviously others that are in that same vein. One of the reasons why it gets low maintenance from our perspective is that we have to deal with the safety concerns first, the signal malfunctions, the signal outages, and the streetlights over the crosswalks that relate directly to safety. They come first, so the illuminated street signs sort of come much later. The signs have been damaged. This one is an example of by storm damage and actually it sort of went through that part of town and damaged quite a number of signs in the last couple of years. We can also get vandalism and bulb outages that require us to provide the maintenance. And as you can see, some of these are really looking in pretty bad shape. There is no dedicated funding, and so what are we proposing as part of this? We're approximately about 900 of the signs, 925, are in reasonable shape. They're less than 5 years old, so they really don't need to be maintained. So what we're proposing is to replace 3,000 signs under this program. 1,028 have already been funded and under other funding sources, and so this program will fund the other 1,972 over the next 2 years. Separately, the second part of the program is traffic signal pole painting. We have a large, 1,100 intersections roughly, and you can anywhere from 4 to 8 poles at an intersection. And over time, these are not getting painted, so you've got fading, cracking on the poles. They get covered with graffiti. People like to put banners up on them, advertising any whatnot, and the tape they use does a real number on the paint. So without repainting them, that doesn't provide any protection from rust and corrosion, and obviously it contributes to the blight in the city. Our current budget is $25,000 a year. That lets us do less than 1% of the intersections in the city a year. So obviously it's woefully underfunded, and you can see that in terms of this is a result of graffiti and the removal of it. Left untreated, the poles start to rust. And then eventually, the ultimate is if we don't take care of it, they end up falling down. And they rust either from the inside out or outside in, and a good stiff breeze or we'll take them out. And this would be example. So the program here is to paint all 1,100 intersections over the next 10 years, 110 intersections a year. And the poles that are rusty will be treated with an inhibitor. If they are beyond repair, that's beyond the scope of this painting project, but we'll do that under normal maintenance. So as we go through and paint them, that will allow us to do the inspection and either bring them up, paint them, treat them and paint them, or schedule them for replacement. So this program is to enhance the existing $25,000 per year with $300,000 that would allow us to paint the 110 intersections a year. The third part of the program is left turn arrows, and we have a long backup of left turn arrow requests. We're currently funded for about one to 3 a year, and that's assuming that we can do it at low cost. And as an example, arrows can be expensive. This particular intersection is Indian School and 51st. We had a request to put in arrows east and west. The cost to do it would be $180,000. Our annual program is $77,000. So this is one that's in essence been deferred. And the reason for the expense, this is on a multi-use pole. The left turn arrow up top is on a multi-use pole. And so we'd have to replace it. We can't make the arm long enough to put it out, put the signal heads out. And as you can see, this is the same intersection. You can barely see the signals on the other side. The normal would be to have the signals up top where the one on the right is. And so, but unfortunately, because that is a multi-use pole, we'd have to replace the whole pole. And to do it in both directions, that's what runs about $180,000. Just to give another comparison, this is one that was done a couple of years ago. It was a left turn arrow that was put in one direction only. This is at 32nd in Michigan. and it was put in to serve the community college. And what ended up happening, it ended up only being the replacement of the one pole, but the existing installation, the cabinet was mounted on the pole. So in the bottom picture, you can see how it ended up. The pole, it had a cabinet. This ended up being $48,000. So just to put it in perspective, when you're trying to do 1 to 3 out of $77,000 annual, this is, that's what you end up with. So in terms of what we're proposing is to do on the order of seven arrows a year, allowing us to do a couple expensive ones and 4 or 5 inexpensive ones, using the T2050 over the next 5 years, and with the anticipation that this will get rid of the backlog. And in terms of what that means in terms of the costs, the illuminated street signs is been funded. 2.4 million was funded out of other funds, and this request is to fund 4.6 over the next 2 years. For the paint, it's to do it all 10. This is $300,000 or $3 million total, but over 10 years, and then the left turn would be over 5 to the tune of 2.1 million for the 5 years, in addition to the existing funding, so that we can get the 7 done. So our request to you is to recommend approval of this. This has already been in front of the
Citizens Transportation.
Citizens Transportation Commission, and they passed it unanimously.
Thank you. I want to tell you, when they first brought this to me, it surprised me. When we passed that tax package for talking about street improvements, never crossed my mind about the traffic signals, the lighted signs, the street signs, and the maintenance required. And so I insisted that they take it to the Citizens Commission because I didn't want them surprised. I think it has shown it is very worthy. It is something that absolutely needs to be done. And since you brought it to me, as I drive down the streets, they really look bad. I didn't realize. And I always wondered how come that one didn't light up and that one did. So didn't think about burnout bulbs. So I appreciate all the time and the extra time you took to take this through and explain in detail how important this is, and the need is so great. So thank you very much. Anyone, Councilman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, this is an issue that we've talked about in the past, and so I'm pleased to see that you're going to be addressing this. One thing I would mention to my colleagues, we did a project along North 32nd where we replaced these signs with the North 32nd logo. And not to create a bunch more work for you guys, but if my colleagues have neighborhoods that would be interested in doing that, I'm guessing you might be willing to talk with them. I mean, if they're going to do it, this will be the time to do it. So if there are, sorry, it's a lot cheaper to create a sense of place by putting a logo on here as opposed to $1 million arch across the street, just, to pull something out of the air. So, might be something that folks might want to consider. You guys can go yell at me after the meeting, but I would, I would feel guilty if I hadn't at least mentioned this as you're in that process. So maybe if you want to talk about that a little bit, or what additional costs that could cause.
Madam Chair and Council, it's certainly doable. And in terms of the expense, it would be negligible, if any. The issue is going to be time. I don't have any issue with doing it, but if we're going to do this program over the next 2 years, then the artwork's got to already be decided already. And I'll say that tongue in cheek. If there are a couple of critical corridors you want to do and you want to put them toward the end so that we have the time to do that, absolutely. But it's going to have to be done very quickly if we're going to do it, or otherwise we're going to hold up. And we're recognizing the fact that, and as you pointed out, when you really drive around and look, they don't look good anymore. They look very bad. And it's been years. Some of them are 15 years old, so they're well past their life.
Thank you. Councilwoman?
So tongue-in-cheek, Melrose loves their arch.
I'm sure they do. We all paid for it.
Yes, and they did too. And to that, I'm hoping 51st Avenue is on this left turn arrow project. I'm assuming it is after seeing it. Secondly, if there is a neighborhood interested in doing the artwork and being able to pull it together, we've waited 15 years, if not, I mean, that sounds like I think we could figure it out within our time frame to allow those neighborhoods to come up with their artwork or their design in order to put it up. I don't know, I guess I will have to sit down with you to see the areas that are hitting District 4, then to get those neighborhoods organized and get them going if they want to do that. And also provide some of the cost. So I'm assuming there's cost in all of this to do it.
Madam Chair and Councilwoman Pastor, yes, I mean,
Okay.
there's some cost to that, so.
Okay, thank you.
Would artwork, current artwork that's through villages be considered ready to go? I mean, we've had those symbols for our villages for a long time, and that might be a good way to identify those areas.
It would be a matter of really looking at what does it look like up, because what you have, it's really nothing but a trailblazer at the end of the sign.
Right.
So it's really, how much artwork can you put up? It's a small area.
I can see that little petroglyph deer, though.
No,
Yes.
but I just don't want to create a false expectation
No.
that it's going to be this huge sign, and you're going to, it's the green background and the words, and you've got the Phoenix symbol on one side and the other symbol like we did on 32nd. Not an issue, but that's the extent of what you can have. So regardless of what, and if you already have existing artwork, that's fine, but I just don't want anybody to think that it's going to be,
No.
it's an added feature and it's worth having. And I
Appreciate it. Vice Mayor, did you have questions or comments?
Thank you for this update. I think it's wonderful. It'll be another evidence of Prop 104 and what the impact it's going to have on this community, that we in the city of Phoenix are making the largest investment in transportation infrastructure of any municipality last year, and we're going to see dividends quickly. So this will be maybe one of the more visible improvements. How will we decide the prioritization for left turn? Safety, I assume, will be?
We have a backlog. Madam Chair and Councilwoman, Vice Mayor Gallego, we do have a backlog, so we do have a priority system on that.
We actually count the intersections, and it's not only a priority, it has to warrant the need for a signal. It looks at the left turn conflicts with the opposing traffic, and it weighs the need for a left turn arrow versus just waiting on the green ball to make the turn. So where we have an accident pattern, where we have high conflict numbers, then that would get a higher score in ranking. But there is a minimum, there is a warrant that you have to achieve with traffic volumes and conditions. So assuming you meet the warrants, we have a backlog. The backlog, but the number of requests we're getting in is just growing asymptotically at the moment. So this is an opportunity to get caught up. But assuming it meets it, there is a ranking process.
And so the primary factor in the rankings will be the number of accidents?
No,
in the
no, it's just a factor. It's basically the safety of the decision-making of the person that's turning left. How many cars are coming toward him? Does he have gaps? If there are no gaps, if he can't make the turn, the presumption is that, and it is a presumption, that you can get two vehicles through when the light turns yellow and goes to all red. If the person is out in the intersection waiting to make their left-hand turn, they're legally allowed to clear the intersection at the end of the light. Some of us do, some of us don't. Depends how aggressive we all want to be, and depending how aggressive the guy coming toward us is. And so that's why, that's the balance. It's if you have a need, if there, I don't want to make it an accident. It's not, you have to have 3 accidents in order to have a left turn. So I really don't, but that's a factor. If we have people not making a good decision, and that makes the need to put the arrow to help them make that decision that much higher. Okay, but it's really looking at the conflict.
Wonderful, thank you.
Councilwoman?
So I sat on the county traffic advisory board, and in that process and in sitting on that, we had a rubric. And they had a rubric where it did look, and it was all about safety. So it was the counts of cars, the number of crashes, fatalities, uh, a number of different items that had to deal with safety. Then determined if there was going to be an extra lane, if there was going to be a light. Do we do that here, or how does? Okay, so it is kind of the same. It's the same concept. Got it.
And in that context, there are federal guidelines
Right.
that we all follow. So, yes.
Okay. All right.
If we have no more questions, could I have a motion to move staff's recommendation forward?
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, I think you get to continue on. This is item 10. Multimodal improvements to Third Street.
Madam Chair and committee members, thank you again for having us on this item. With me here is Mark Malenchenko. He's the Special Projects Administrator working on this. Just to give you a history on this project, we've been working on this for quite some time, well over 10 years. It was generated by the community through the corridor there, and so we've been doing a series of studies for the last couple of years, and then most recently had some more energized movement on this corridor and looking at trying to see if we can do some changes on the corridor. So with me, Mark is going to kind of provide that presentation today.
Just to get things started, there's a map in your packet that provides a little bit more information, a fold out. And with that, I'd like to thank Madam Chair and committee members for the opportunity to bring this exciting transportation project forward. As Ray said, the Third Street improvements are linked to many projects, many plans that have been adopted by City Council and other projects that have been undertaken over the years. The Complete Streets ordinances, the Downtown Transportation Plan, Reinvent Phoenix Midtown Plan, so there are a number of projects that align with the improvements that we have recommended for Third Street. The corridor that we have been studying goes from Indian School Road and ties into the Roosevelt Street improvements. And you can see on the on your fold out as well as on the map there, the project ties into numerous transit routes. It also runs parallel with the 7th Street corridor, high commuter corridor, as well as the light rail corridor along Central Avenue. What we are proposing for 3rd Street are improvements that would improve transportation choices. We would add another mode, bicycle mode on 3rd Street, as well as improve the pedestrian atmosphere along the street. 3rd Street is a collector. It is part of our plan to implement the bicycle master plan, which is it's the #1 corridor in the plan. And so when we look at implementing that in the downtown area, we looked at 2 primary corridors for connectivity into downtown. When we went out to the community and talked with others, we said the 2 primary corridors are 3rd Avenue and 3rd Street to make those connections into downtown. We aren't going to put bike lanes right now on the 7s. Those are high commuter corridors and connections to the freeway. Central Avenue right now has a Sharrow lane, but it really is not the atmosphere for bicycle usage. And so what we are proposing on 3rd Street, right now, there is a 2-1-2 configuration, 2 traffic lanes in either direction and a center turn lane. What staff is proposing is to go from a 5-lane down to a 3-lane roadway with buffered bike lanes for cyclists. This would provide protection, and it would create a signature bicycle corridor and also be more conducive to the type of street that Third Street is. It's a neighborhood street. Yes, it has a full range of uses, and it also provides connections to parks and schools and employment, and is an alternate route to downtown. But we feel that these improvements would link strongly with the plans that were discussed, as well as the input from the community. These plans were brought to the community at two primary open houses at the beginning of the year. We had one at either end of the corridor. We had Indian Steel Park and then the Jewish Heritage Center at the south end. There was strong support from the community. Actually, the input received from emails as well as input from the citizen outreach effort was about 85 to 87% in favor of these improvements. We also had a stakeholder group that was a byproduct of the eBay development near Indianola. And so we had 5 or 6 meetings with Third Street stakeholder groups also, and they were instrumental in moving this project forward. And with that, we are looking for support from the Transportation Infrastructure Subcommittee to move into the next stage of development, our final design phase. This project is included in the Capital Improvement Program for design and construction.
We have a number of cards. Would you like to hear the cards first? Okay. Lisa Parks. I'll give each one 2 minutes.
Thank you for allowing me a chance to speak. I'm Lisa Parks. I'm president of Phoenix Spokespeople, and I'm also representing Grid Bike Share. We have thousands of bicyclists in Phoenix, and actually with the Grid Bike Share, we have nearly 10,000 users alone. So there's a lot of people who are biking, wanting to bike, and a lot of the people wanting to bike are interested but concerned, so they're not quite sure where they should ride, how they can ride, and so we really need the infrastructure that can create this connectivity and allow people to just get out there and ride where they want to go. I ride on 3rd Street, and it's terrifying. As Mark Milenchenko had said, that it is the number one project on the Bicycle Master Plan. So this is really important for this to go through to the final design stages so that we can have these complete streets that we have much need for. Thank you.
Thank you. Margaret Dietrich.
I'm Margaret Dietrich with the Midtown Neighborhood Association, and we have our logo ready to go for those signs on Central that you saw up there. Our east boundary is 3rd Street. Our neighborhood, the Midtown Neighborhood Association, goes from Indian School to Hance Park, and our east boundary, as I said, is 3rd Street. We were part of the whole Reinvent Phoenix effort that is trying to make a walkable community. It is extremely dangerous to try and walk across 3rd Street as it is now. We've met some nice people on the other side of the street that we would really like to spend some time with. And we have a park over there that we want to get involved with. We participated in the discussions with Mark Milenchenko and that whole group. We're totally in favor of all that's being proposed. It's very exciting, and we just think this will be a huge asset for Phoenix and the bicycle community. They need to be out of that lane that's on Central. It is just scary to cars as well as bicycles. Thank you.
Thank you. Ann Sawyer says available to speak. She's in favor. Did you want to speak? Ditto. Got it. John Walker.
Good morning, Council. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm also with the Phoenix spokespeople, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Third Street Improvement. I think it's a very exciting proposal and I hope we do move forward with it. Third Street, as Lisa was kind of alluding to, is in no shape really adapted right now for cycling. It's fairly terrifying to ride on there. I do it periodically, but certainly not during rush hour. And it's not that there's too many cars there, it's just that there's too few cars and they're driving too fast, because the way it's laid out now, the streets are way too wide and the cars are just going up and down. So I think with the improvement, the proposed improvement, it's going to have a minimal effect on traffic, but more importantly, it's going to show the community that Phoenix, at least in this street, is prioritizing different modes of transportation, certainly cars, bikes, pedestrians. And I think, as Lisa was also alluding to, there's a large segment of people that are interested or curious about biking, but they feel uncomfortable doing this. However, with the Third Street improvement, I think that contingent of people will be given a great opportunity to use the bike lane and to frequent the businesses that are starting to emerge in that corridor, in large part because of the transformations that the city of Phoenix is doing. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Dorina Bustamante.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm Dorina Bustamante with Downtown Phoenix Inc. Actually, wearing a different hat today, representing the Third Street Business Alliance, which is the Midtown section of Third Street. I have been the person who was the squeaky wheel who approached Ray Dovolino about 10 years ago once I was approached by stakeholders, property owners in the Midtown section of Third Street, because they personally wanted to improve the sidewalks and maintain it and wanted to see bike lanes and pedestrian bicycle friendly amenities. So we took their concerns to transportation, and Ray was very engaging and helpful, as well as Councilman Simplot at the time. And just to take you through the journey of that citizen interaction works if you just ask and make it work. So it started about 2006, 2007 that Ray told us about, those of us in the community, about a potential grant opportunity for bicycle and pedestrian grant study through MAG, of which we received about 2/3 of the funds that we requested. From that point, it was awarded in 2008. In 2010, the study was published. In fact, Streets extended the study and put city funds into it to take it further, to really look in depth into the possibility for bicycle lanes, which was huge for us. And then 2010 it was published. So the Reinvent Phoenix process was even more exciting because we were worried that maybe that design guidelines document was just going to sit on the shelf, but it ended up going into the Reinvent Phoenix plan, where members of us with the various steering committees, for example, the Midtown Steering Committee, were able to digest and dissect and take things even further. So I'm obviously very much in support in seeing this plan move forward, and I really just want to say thank you so much, especially kudos to Ray and his team and Mark and everyone for really listening to us in the community, especially Councilwoman Pastor with some of our concerns with eBay. And yeah, we just are really excited about this opportunity, especially when it's going to connect to important parks into our downtown core. Thank you.
Next, we have Derek Taverna. I'm probably killing your name. Says, in favor, will speak.
Yeah, I'll just say, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I live in the Ashton Place Historic District, and so I'm a resident affected by the changes, and I love it. I think it's a great, thank you just for getting this all together and, hearing everyone's comments. And I'm just very excited about the opportunity to have bike lanes and improve traffic and just have accessibility in that corridor altered. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is available to speak, in favor, Liz O'Brien.
Good morning, Liz O'Brien. I'm a neighbor in Ashland Place. I live on Vernon, and I'd have 2 quick points that I'd like to make today. The first one is for the youth in our community who attend St. Mary's. A lot of them are doing the right thing by taking the light rail, and they walk down our street every morning. It's a beautiful little parade of green and white. It's wonderful, and I think they're told to get to the end of Vernon and go to Virginia and cross, but we know that many of them do not do that, and I would really like to see the safety of our youth increased by having 3rd Street not be filled with 5 lanes of traffic running up and down the street. The second point that I would like to make then, I had some in-town guests yesterday, and we wanted to go experience some local flavor, so they wanted to go to Ocotillo, so we walked from our house up to Ocotillo to grab some coffee. It was far from pleasant. It was just far from pleasant. There was still some rain puddles yesterday. We were getting splashed a little bit, and just the loud traffic, it just was far from pleasant, and how wonderful it would be to show our out-of-town visitors that we have some beautiful walking paths to get to some of our great local places to go get coffee. Thank you very much. I am in big favor of this plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is David Oak, or Oakey.
Thank you. Obviously, I'm a bicyclist, but and I actually avoid 3rd Street. I live in the Villa del Coronado, which is about a half a block that abuts 3rd Street. It's on the corner, the section of Coronado, Alvarado, and 3rd Street, and it's a historic building, and I'm one of the Board of Governors there. And I would think that the governors, although we haven't talked about this, that they would support what you're doing here. When I bike, though, I go down Central because it's safer. I don't even go out to 3rd Street. And then I will cut over on Washington or Jefferson and then get back on 3rd Street where there's an actual bike lane. There's accidents all the time on 3rd Street, especially the corner of 3rd and Alvarado. And I think if you go to your accident count, you'll see that. Anything that slows this traffic down from 50 miles an hour, you never know how fast it's going. How many people, I guess it depends on how many people are late to work on that day, would really be helpful. And also making it a more walkable neighborhood, because it is a historic district and people do like to walk through that area, but 3rd Street, there's not sidewalks in some places, and because in places where there are sidewalks, they're right on the curb, it makes it very almost dangerous with the cars going by. So I'm in support of it, and anything you can do is great. And I don't know why it took 10 years to get to this point. I hope you go ahead and move this along, and I would really like to see a timetable even speed it up on this project. I think the striping will slow down traffic, but I still think there's a lot of other things that we can do to make this a more walkable neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jason Schumberger?
I didn't necessarily have remarks ready.
Okay, a thumbs up?
Basically, an additional thumbs up.
Okay. Okay. Do you have any idea? I'm very embarrassed, but I have no idea how to pronounce this name. Behrouz. This is the first name. What?
I don't know. Beirut, yeah,
Huh?
yes.
Yes. Okay, just in favor, ditto?
I saw him here earlier. He must have stepped
Okay. The card says he's in favor, so. Comments, questions from committee members?
Madam Chair, if I could add just a little bit more clarification on the other improvements that are slated for this corridor and that were brought up. There's the bicycle, the repurposing of the street. There are the sidewalk areas that are missing. Those will be improved. That's primarily in the historic districts on the west side of 3rd Street. In addition, we will be repaving the street and then also looking at potential safe crossings, one near the Monterey School area to provide connections over to the Encanto rail station. So that will be looked at in that corridor. And then there may even be another possible area where we could provide another safe crossing.
And do you have a projected completion date?
Right now, it's in the capital improvement program, and what we would like to do, we will, in fiscal year, this fiscal year and 17, we'll be doing the design, and then we have, in 18 and 19, we have money slated for construction.
Vice Mayor?
This is an exciting project. It primarily serves District 4, but also touches District 7 and my district, District 8, and very exciting. I, before being elected, got to chair the Environmental Quality Commission when we created the bicycle subcommittee, which was one of the players that helped bring forward the plan. And it's just very exciting when we develop a plan and then we're following it. This, I think, will be a big win for the community. And we've been hearing and talking about buffered bicycle lanes often. We've gotten a lot of feedback on the Sharrows in downtown, and I think people really like this particular design, so congratulations. It's also wonderful that it happens at the same time as our Tiger Grant for the Grand Canal, which will help create safer pedestrian and bicycle paths along the Grand Canal. And one of the things we've heard from the tourism community is that we have a lot of great assets, including the Museum District, Pueblo Grande, and that if we could connect all of them in a safe way, that we might see more bicycle-based tourism. So I think this is a really exciting opportunity from an economic development perspective. I would love people visiting our city and enjoying our wonderful weather, getting out on a bicycle and seeing multiple of our tourism gems, which are all connected by these two projects. So I love it when things work together across multiple departments at the city and have multiple benefits, from safe routes to school to showing off our unique history in this area. So a wonderful success.
Councilwoman Pastor?
Well, this is really exciting. It's been in the makes, obviously, for 10 years. So we like to thank Councilman Simplot for taking the lead. I get to finish it and make sure it happens. So that's the exciting part of all of this, and all the great work of many of those that participated, Midtown Association and Dorena and 3rd Street Promenade area. In particular, Heidi, who is very vocal about this. I hear this once a month, every month, and then I come back and have many notes for everybody. So I am aware. In particular, I am glad to hear the flashing beacon is going to happen for the students and for St. Mary's, as I am a St. Mary's alumni, and understand the crossing that happens. And we don't always necessarily listen to go to Virginia, especially on a hot day, as we're right there on Vernon and wanting to quickly cross the way or quickly get to the light rail. So I'm excited. I'm happy that this is happening. Hopefully we can move it along a little faster, accelerate it so that we can then use it as an example and a model of for other areas of our city. And so the one piece about it is the connectivity, because it connects to Indian Steel Park, and then it goes and it connects to Roosevelt, and all that connectivity within between there with students, and also, even if it's off, the art museums, to connect to the art museums. This is just a wonderful piece of a project that will be fun to watch as it blossoms, and then great to use. So thank you.
Councilman?
Clearly, the traffic, I mean, right now, there's a decent amount of traffic that's going on there. I mean, do you have any traffic counts or?
We do,
Share.
Madam Chair, Councilman Gates. There was a traffic study that was prepared by Baker Engineering that we used from the excess reInvent Phoenix funding, and we looked at the 2015 volumes and then the 2035 volumes. We also looked at level of service. The level of service, say, we have two intersections that are probably the most problematic. One is McDowell. You have the art school and just the amount of traffic there. Right now, it's that intersection is like between a D and an E. In future years, 2035, it will be an F. We have a majority of our intersections in the city at peak periods are in that range. But we feel that the configuration of these intersections to further delineate uses and the travel lanes, et cetera, I think will add a safety environment. Yes, traffic will be slower, but we feel that it won't be detrimental to the intersections.
So you anticipate some of this traffic's gonna go over to 7th Street, though? And what are you doing to plan for that?
There will be a certain percentage that will be dispersed to 7th Street as well as Central Avenue and other corridors. As you know, 3rd Street isn't a connecting street, but people use it to come into downtown. And the modeling that we receive from MAG shows a dispersion of traffic to other adjacent corridors.
Yeah, my sense is that the people who are going on to 3rd Street to get downtown are not gonna go to Central, because Central, people from my area, they're coming down the reverse lanes on 7th Street. They're not gonna go all the way over to, I mean, Central is a no-go for people. I mean, they know that it's gonna go extremely slow. So my sense is, again, not being a professional, these people from 3rd Street are all gonna go over to 7th Street. So I hope that, sounds like we have some time. I hope that we plan accordingly, or that's gonna back up the reverse lanes more. I understand this is gonna be a benefit. This is like, it feels like the reverse lanes discussion all over to me. Again, it'll be great for the folks who live in the area, but for people who are coming from North Central Phoenix, it is gonna put additional load. So I know that you guys are thinking about that and are gonna be prepared accordingly.
And to go along with your comments, which are great, when looking at a road diet or repurposing of the street, we looked at the guidelines from FHWA and other national organizations, and it's generally between 8,000 and 18,000 ADTs a day on our type of street. And we fall into that between, it depends upon the segment. There is a 10,000, there's a 17, and then a 12. So generally, we fall into that category of a warrant for a road diet.
Thank you.
I have a question on how much do you estimate this is going to cost for the design package, and where is funding coming from?
Madam Chair, what we're looking at is probably in the order of magnitude for the design phase, probably in the 200 to 300, possibly in that range for design, $300,000. And then I believe on the cost, the construction cost estimate, I believe we're in the a little bit over $2 million with regards to the construction phase of that corridor. And keeping in mind, as we've talked about, we are looking at some level of repaving along that corridor, as well as when we start looking at changing some of the lane configurations, we do need to do some signal work potentially. And so we're going to kind of flush that out through our design phase to make sure that we have those elements incorporated, as also the portion that doesn't have sidewalk along some of that area. Potentially, we might have to get some right-of-way along those areas. So there's some factors that we have to look at with regards to not only the features that you're going to see, sidewalks, street lights, things of that nature, but also the drainage, as it was pointed out, also kind of looking at what other improvements can we do along there that are drainage-related through the corridor.
And
I'm sorry, the source would be, we were looking at our AHR, our Arizona Highway User Revenue Funds for this project.
And some of the items that you just mentioned, is that included in the previous item on the list of priorities that you have for improvements on the long streets?
For Madam Chair, for the one that we just talked about with regards to the overlay program, that's more of a maintenance pavement preservation. This would be a capital infrastructure project that would be separate.
So they'd be totally separate?
Separate,
And
yes.
separate funding?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? How about a motion?
I move the approval of the final design of, the multi-improvements to 3rd Street.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, I believe, is Phoenix Dial-A-Ride.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, as you know, it's not like Maria Hyatt to miss an important presentation at a council subcommittee. But today she is at an Arizona Transit Association conference representing the city of Phoenix. She's doing a presentation on all that the city is doing with Transportation 2050. And so she's left this presentation today in very capable hands of her team. With us is Ken Kessler, who's the acting director today, and I'll hand it over to Ken for further introductions.
Thanks, Mario. Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, as Mario mentioned, I'm acting on behalf of Maria for a couple days here while she's up in Flagstaff, talking about her wonderful transportation plan with folks from throughout the state. Today, we're here to talk to you about the recommendation to award a new dial ride contract. The current contract we have in place for our dial ride services expires at the end of this fiscal year, so we recently embarked upon a procurement process to get a new contract in place. And with me today is my colleague Jesus Sapien, and as well as Jennifer Lugo, who administers our dial ride program, and they will go through a presentation to discuss this contract.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for having us here today. As you may recall, last year we gave the subcommittee kind of a Dial Ride 101, an overview of what Dial Ride is, who it serves, and at that time we mentioned that we would be going out to procure at the end of last calendar year. And at that time you gave us some input in terms of what kind of customer improvements you would like to see to make it easier for passengers to book their trips, check on their trips, those type of improvements. So we'll talk a little bit about those, as well as give you an overview of the solicitation itself. So we posted at the end of November, and we included an on-site visit, which gave proposers the opportunity to look at the vehicles and ask questions about the service. We had a proposal due date at the end of December, and we had an evaluation committee of several of our colleagues throughout the region who specialize in these types of services. That included Valley Metro. On the next slide, I'll go over who we had on the evaluation panel. And we posted the award on February 16th. We had no protests at that time, so we moved forward with presenting it to the CTC at last month's meeting. So as I said earlier, the committee members included one member of City of Phoenix Public Transit. We also coordinated with our Human Services Department, who specialize in also providing these type of services, and then our colleagues from across the region who also provide Dial Ride services and mobility services in several cities. So what we heard during the Prop 104 outreach process was our passengers, whether it be bus or Dial Ride, they wanted some technological improvements, so that's what we included, and you gave us some input as well during our presentation last year. So we're going to incorporate a few things. Number one is overflow service. So what that is on any given day or week when our contractor feels that they can outsource some of the trips to someone like a taxi company, they're going to do that so that to make the passenger experience a little more amenable to things like how long they have to wait for their trip, how long they're on a vehicle, those type of things, and where they need to go as well. Other things are online trip booking. We heard this a lot during the Prop 104 outreach process, where people just want to make it easier. They want to go online. They want to be able to book their trip, change their trip, cancel, check on their trip, things like that. And in addition to the online version, they want to do it through the phone. So individuals who don't like using a computer or are averse to that type of idea, they can do it through interactive voice response. So they can select from a menu of options when they call up to do those same type of things, book the trip, check on the status, when's their ride coming, things like that. And we think that those three aspects of this new contract will help service flow a little smoother, because we know the calls that your offices get. So far this year, for Dial Ride service overall, we're averaging between 91 and 92% on-time performance, which when we look at the industry is really good. But that 8% or so are the calls that you get about those trips that don't go so well because of things like traffic or multiple people being picked up on any given day. This is a shared ride service, and sometimes we do have to juggle things when people make last-minute cancellations and things like that. So we think that under this new contract model, we will see some improvements. The other thing that you may be aware of is under this contract in joint effort with Valley Metro, we'll be doing away with transfers. That's a really big, yes, it's a really big deal.
Yes, it is.
It's a big deal, and we've been working on that with them for 2 years. So I know it's not the 10-year wait time that Streets had on their Third Street project, but
Or some other people have been working on it for 20 years.
it's a big deal for us, and under this contract, we'll be able to do that, and so big improvements, we think. The last thing I'll mention is that under this contract, you will see the Prop 104 enhancements that we talked about during public outreach for that effort. So anywhere that we will expand bus service, whether it be putting in a new route, extending a route, or extending the day if we start bus service earlier or go later, we'll do the same thing with Dial-A-Ride. So those times when people want to take Dial-A-Ride and make those connections, we will be able to do it. Anything we do to bus, we will do to Dial-A-Ride. So that's a really, really good thing, we think. So as stated earlier, in the mid-February, we posted the results, and MV Public Transportation is the proposed awardee. That is what the evaluation team came up with, and we as a department concur with that, looking at all the details. And again, we had no protests, so the procurement, in our opinion, went very smoothly. The financial impact, this is a 6-year contract that we're looking at. 99 million over 6 years. That's pretty much in line with what we've seen under our current contract. And what we did is that we took it to the CTC last month. We did the same thing with them in February. We gave them an overview of what Dial-A-Ride is and who it serves and how it works. And then in March, we walked them through the solicitation results as well. And they approved it unanimously. So with that, we'll take any questions, and our recommendation is that the subcommittee recommend City Council approval for the Phoenix Dial-A-Ride contract to MB Transportation.
Have questions, comments? Vice Mayor?
Thank you. This is another exciting vote for us. More results from Prop 104, helping our city be more inclusive. And really, this one in particular is very inclusive, a part of the inclusive brand that we're developing here in Phoenix. UCP and other advocacy organizations have said that we are one of the top cities in the entire country for inclusivity, and we've gotten great recognition for the work we recently did at Sky Harbor Airport with Shared Ride and making sure that individuals with disabilities enjoy the same great service as the rest of our customers. So again, we're really leading the way as the City of Phoenix and saying that we value everyone in our city and we want everyone to be able to move around our city freely. I'm also very excited about this particular company. During Prop 104, I got a lot of great feedback about the drivers and how they're willing, if there's an individual who, like the Arizona Center for Blind and Visually Impaired, weighed in about a driver who helped someone who'd lost a very important piece of equipment and what a difference that makes in someone's daily life. Also got to learn about the great training that drivers have because they may encounter things like for a seizure during transportation, and that additional training can be very important in helping have a successful medical outcome. So that is a real win for the city. I got to see the founding chairwoman of the company win a Women Who Move Transportation Award last month, and it's an impressive story behind the company and her commitment to inclusivity as well. So I think we have a great partnership here. I'm excited that we'll be bringing services to our entire city, including our North Phoenix residents. This in particular was one of the reasons that AARP was so supportive of Proposition 104 and the Transportation 2050 plan, that inclusivity and allowing people to age in place, stay at home as long as they would like or as long as possible. So a win for people on the economic side as well as our city as a whole, and I'm looking forward to supporting this.
Councilman?
I'm pleased to see the addition of, obviously, the ability to book trips online. Was there any discussion of them creating an app, though?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, yes, we had one initial meeting with the company. It's called Trapeze, which is a software that the city owns, and that is an option. So we want to make as many options available to passengers as we can. So we've only had one meeting so far. We didn't want to put the cart in front of the horse, before we awarded this contract. but the overview they were able to give us on what their software has the ability to do was very impressive.
Great. Well, I think an app, that's, look, the reality is for a lot of people, it's easier to deal with an app than trying to find a website, especially if they're doing it on a mobile device. So I hope that does happen. And certainly with the length of this contract and the revenue, should certainly support the development of an app, I would think.
Yes, during that first meeting with the software developer, we were given an overview of what they do in other cities. And we were impressed because they keep in mind who they're serving, the readability of the screen, the navigation to book those trips and check them out, check on their existing trips. It was impressive because that's exactly who they serve across, they're well known in the industry for catering to this type of service.
Councilwoman?
Would the app be part of the contract, or will it be one of the items that we would request? Or was it part of the RFP?
Yes, the technological improvements were included as part of the contract. So that is part of the cost that the companies proposed as part of this solicitation process.
Okay, perfect.
I have a question. You have a list here of the services and confirmation, book, cancel trips, confirm, the whole list. Do you have access to this data so that you can evaluate each one of those and ask for improvements? And is there something in the contract as a minimum standard they have to meet?
Madam Chair, yes, we actually listed a whole host of performance standards in the contract. The good thing about this version of the software is that the city owns it. So Jennifer and her staff, myself, we can go in there at any time and look at that performance data. If we get a customer inquiry about certain trip booking, we can go there and look at it. And that's actually in our 2-year effort with our PTA, moving towards looking at what type of paratransit service models are being provided across the country. That's something that they said they would like to do. They would like to have the software in-house for exactly what you're talking about, to be able to look at performance metrics, to be able to investigate, trips that may have had a glitch here and there. But we own that software, so we can go in it at any given time and look at exactly what you're talking about. It's our software, it's on our servers.
Great, thank you. We do have some cards. Marvin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been very interested in this for a long, long time. Back in 2007, 2008, we almost had this program, and then the stock market crash pushed us back. I am so happy that we have revived this program for the sake of anybody that is disabled or anybody that's visually impaired to no longer have to do transfers. I can remember getting stuck at a transfer point for 2 hours waiting for the connection. That won't happen anymore. I have a doctor out in Gilbert that I haven't been able to get to in 4 years. I can now be able to get to her as of July 1st. Instead of taking 4.5 hours to get there and multiple transportation, I can now get there on a direct ride. I thank God that we have finally gotten to this point to get it done. I'm sure there'll be some kinks over the next 6 or 9 months, but I know for a fact that everybody is willing to work together to get this solved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Comments, questions, motion? I'm very excited about this one. So.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor? Yeah, we have a third from out there.
We'll
Say
reflect
aye.
that in the minutes, the third. Aye.
Passes unanimously. Thank you very much, and thank you, staff, for working on this for a long time. Your patience and endurance is greatly appreciated. All right, brings us to the next item. Alternative water and wastewater piping materials.
Madam Chair, members
And
of
I
the
want to recognize a former mayor, vice mayor, and council member, John Nelson, in our audience, who has been involved, had comments on this for, can I say it, a couple decades? It not be embarrassing? Okay. Thank you for being here. Oh, sure, thank you. Ooh, that was a low blow.
Demonstrate your dedication.
Yeah, that's it.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, Karen Peters is here along with some very special guests, which I will allow her to introduce on this item.
Thank you, Mario. Madam Chairman, members of the subcommittee, we are pleased to have with us today some special guests to talk to us about the merits of alternative piping, water and wastewater piping materials. As you know, the Water Services Department does do its own construction specifications and guidelines regarding the types of materials based on American Water Works Association and American Society of Testing and Materials standards that work best for our system and our environment. Our friends here would like to talk to us about alternatives to what we have developed. I'm here to introduce Mr. Bruce Hollins, the Executive Director of the Unibel PVC Pipe Association. With him is Mr. Steve Cooper, the PVC Pipe Association Regional Engineer. And with that, I'll turn it over to them.
And I thank you. I know we promised this hearing a couple months ago, and your patience and endurance was appreciated that you could come today. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, for having us here today. I just want to bring your attention to a little binder that you all have as well. I believe we have 5 reports. We didn't have 10 on PVC pipe longevity from Utah State University, which was recently published. In your binder, you'll see a report from the U.S. Conference of Mayors and some other documents that I'll refer to in our brief presentation to you. And just to, another note before we start, the AWWA, American Water Works Association, and ASTM standards referenced our materials meet all of those standards as well, just like the materials you currently use in your systems today. The PVC Pipe Association serves the engineering, regulatory, public health, and standardization communities. We are a nonprofit association. I'm the executive director. Steve Cooper, again mentioned, is our senior regional engineer. Why are we here today? We're here because we'd like to talk to you about how open competition can benefit your city. We're here to cover questions, any questions you may have on PVC pipe. And we can explore as well what other municipalities are doing by updating their procurement policies across the United States. What is open competition? It allows all qualified materials to compete in your bidding processes. It doesn't stipulate which kind of materials are allowed. What you do is you set the standards or the specifications in your bidding process, and then materials that meet those standards can bid. What does that do? It lowers your cost for all the piping that you buy, no matter what piping you buy. So you don't have to buy our stuff, but if we're in the bid, we're going to keep everybody else sharper for your benefit and the benefit of your taxpayers. It provides more choices to the design engineers, fosters innovation, and again, it doesn't exclude any other materials. In fact, closed specs exclude other materials from the process. Who supports open competition? Well, you have, again, mentioned in your binder, U.S. Conference of Mayors, municipal procurement study that they put out. This is a municipal organization. You're probably members. It came from the group, the fellow who heads up the Mayor's Water Council group there, Rich Anderson, who has a PhD. He wrote this report, talks all about some of the things I'm talking about today. Other organizations as well support open competition. The USDA, in fact, in this state, across the country, requires all funding it provides rural utilities to be spent in an open and competitive way. That's been going on for 40 years across the United States. And there's some other organizations, U.S. Water Alliance, the Water Finance Research Foundation, etc. So it's not a new concept. There's a lot of stuff out there on it. Why municipal leaders are calling for open competition? Well, across the country, huge bills are waiting for taxpayers to upgrade their water and sewer systems. And open competition allows you to get better bang for your buck, to keep your costs lower, improve your system. And it's just not about low bid either. It's about materials that meet the specs, materials that last long. And I think it also benefits, the fact that the municipality shows itself to be more transparent to taxpayers. There's the USDA open procurement policy. You can call them up. Typically, each state has 2 USDA engineers that administer the programs in each state. You can call them up and see what open competition, how it works for them, how they've been doing it for 40 years. PVC facts, longevity, 100+ years. This is proven by several studies. Lowest water main break rate of all materials. It's the most used material in the U.S. Many municipalities use it in Arizona as well. It's appropriate for your state. And in your binder, you've got some places that are using PVC, or at least allow it in the bid along with other materials. There's the longevity report. Now, in your document, you've got a section study graphic showing you the water main break rate graphic from the Utah State study, showing you that PVC has the lowest break rate. I didn't mention it, I talked about how open bids lower costs. You've got a one-pager on an Ohio State study recently that came out showing how open bidding has reduced costs for municipalities that use that in their state. The material is well used. Here you can see North American Municipal Application Piping Market. Shows you what materials are out there, what the main ones are. So we're certainly a major material in the marketplace. We've been around 60 years. There's some places that use PVC right now in their systems. We're talking also, when we talk about opening your bidding process, we're talking about your water side and your sewer. PVC is used extensively in both areas. Considerations, open competition, again, enhances transparency, fosters innovation. Products are safe, long-lasting, they meet all the standards out there. Cost considerations can help reduce your costs, and it's not just about a product, again, it's lower cost, it's actually extremely durable. Helps, your tax dollars go further. And it's an equal opportunity for Arizona businesses. We have in the audience some PVC pipe manufacturers in this state. In fact, in one of the companies is operating here in Phoenix itself, but they cannot bid on bids that your city puts out for your water and sewer infrastructure. So I think that concludes my brief study. I'm awaiting any questions you may have. Steve Cooper here, our senior engineer, will certainly be glad to answer some questions as well.
I have a couple questions for you to start this off. I think the city of Phoenix is known for being pretty open when we solicit bids. I also have been around the council for a long time and have tackled this subject before. What has changed in your product line that makes it more durable? It's one thing to go for low bid and install it. It's another thing on how quickly you have to replace it. And that has been a concern of ours because of our soil is different, our heat impacts it. What's changed in the last decade that makes your product so much improved?
I think it's almost 2 decades, and really it's just the fact that the product's been around longer to show you how it performs. And you can reference the Utah State study. They did some dig-ups across the country. They looked at studies from around the world. PVC, been in the ground for 50 years, performed like it was brand new pipe. Steve Cooper can answer probably some of those questions as well.
I don't think there's been major changes in the product. I think that it's just an awareness of the attributes of it. I mean, there are cities all over the country, large cities, Tucson, Dallas, El Paso, Albuquerque, Las Vegas, all have been using PVC pipe for many, many decades. So it's just really an awareness of what the product can bring to the infrastructure of Phoenix.
Questions, comments? Councilman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So are there any other jurisdictions in Arizona that prohibit the consideration of PVC?
I don't think the word would be prohibit, simply not include.
Right.
Prohibit is an
Right, you
action.
can't bid on it.
Right, but it's
Yeah.
not a prohibition is a direct action
Right,
against something.
right.
This
So
simply
Phoenix is
no-
the only one that has this policy.
No, there's other places too.
I mean, I think there was a list in here, and it was just pulled together, from the internet searches and so on and so forth. I mean, there's a few other locations that don't allow, sometimes it's for water, sometimes it's for sewer, but PVC to be included. But by and large, it's well used and has been for decades in this state.
And you had a graph up there that showed the use of PVC versus other materials.
Mhm.
If we could go back to that, I wanted to ask you about that.
I don't know.
Lose it?
It's this graph here, yes, is that the one you're looking at?
No, that's the water main break
oh,
rate. I
the,
don't, do you know how to go back on?
They're doing it for you.
Sorry, okay. So okay, I'll make it go forward. Okay.
the one you're.
Yeah, it's the market share.
Right.
Yeah.
So that is, have you seen a trend? Say, because I mean, is that just things that have been built in the last 10? What are we looking at there? Is that just all pipes out there and that are in place, or is that have been installed in the last 10 years, 20 years?
That wouldn't be of existing inventory. I guess
Yeah.
that would be more of a snapshot of users that you see today or in this last decade.
Right.
And, I mean, PVC pipe is used both for water and sewer in sizes 4-inch, and now they're making it up to 60-inch in size. So the demand for the product is growing, as is the capacity to make larger pipes based on that demand. So that just gives you a snapshot of what's going on both in rural and in municipal systems across this country.
So it seems to be the dominant material used, PVC is, on both the water and the wastewater
Correct.
side.
That's correct.
And to follow up on Councilwoman Williams' question, are there jurisdictions that you can point to within Arizona that have had PVC in the ground for an extended period of time that you might direct us to look at? Or
I think Tucson is one that I know has about, I think last I recall, maybe 700 miles of PVC pipe, water pipe. I'm not sure how many miles of sewer pipe they have. I could refer to some of the people here from Arizona that might be able to answer that, if you'd like to have other city, including the cities that are in this list.
yeah, I think that would definitely be helpful, because clearly it's the dominant material that's used, and this is a nationwide chart. So the only issue in my mind is there's something very unique, and clearly that was what was considered by this council before, that there's something unique that shows that this PVC cannot be successful to such an extent that it shouldn't even be considered in the bidding process.
I think there, aside, and we can certainly give you a more robust list of users in this state, but you can look at other places that have similar climates, like Las Vegas. It's a huge user of PVC pipe.
So, Madam Chair, I actually had a question for staff.
Good.
As it relates to how the RFPs are handled. When we do an RFP to consider installing new pipe, can you talk to me about, do we have technical people that are on those RFP panels who
Yeah,
can?
so essentially, Madam Chair, Councilman Gates, so essentially, the specifications are put out for each job, and it's evaluated on the criteria. So that's put together by an engineering firm, and then it's from our standard specifications, which is what they're alluding to. And the standard specifications were developed with local engineering firms that gave us guidance at the time.
Okay. So the people who are sitting on the RFP committees, you have individuals who have the expertise,
Yes,
who
exactly.
could, theoretically evaluate a bid on PVC versus other materials and make a determination.
Right, and most of the studies that we did, I think is what you were talking about, is most of the studies that were done in the early 2000s or so, which the evaluations were done of the products that we were going to allow or not going to allow.
Okay, and I appreciate that, but I'm asking about the RFPs, the panels that we assemble. It's not, we have technical people who are sitting on the panel who would have the ability to,
Yeah,
as
yeah.
opposed to someone, let's say, who has a financial background,
Correct,
who'd be
yeah.
really good at figuring
So our
out.
panels are made up of contractors and of engineers and of things like that that evaluate processes.
So they could look at PVC in a different material and make a determination, looking at where the project might be as to whether
possible.
PVC would make sense here as opposed to another material.
That's possible. What you'd say is over the past 10 years or so that we haven't evaluated PVC and it hasn't been compared against any other thing else, but yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. I have a question for you. Do we currently have any PVC in the
Currently,
ground?
Phoenix does not have any PVC in the system.
That's for both water and sewer, I think.
Correct, correct.
And have we in the past?
No,
Okay, we've never used it.
PVC's never been allowed.
Okay.
And
Councilwoman
why is
Pastor?
that?
And so what the analysis, like I said, in the early 2000s was our water temperature and how that water temperature makes their product potentially more rigid or crack or fail predominantly more than the other materials that we've seen.
And in that line of questioning, how has technology in the PVC piping evolved and have improved over time?
Well, I mean, PVC's been used in hot weather environments since the beginning. Now, I have a piece of pipe that's 50 years old here from Texas, that San Antonio area. So that, there are safety factors, and there are the product itself is a very robust product. And there's two things we have here. One is for pressure and water systems, and then for deflection and loads that are associated with gravity pipe systems. So
Which are your sewer.
basically, San Diego and other hot weather environments, whether it be groundwater supplies or whether it be surface water supplies, that see fluctuations in temperature, whether it be ground temperature or water or effluent temperatures, have been using it for decades.
And one thing to note, Madam Chair, Councilman Pastor, I think I might have misspoke. We do have plastic pipe in our services, not in the distribution mains, which run up and down the street, but the pipelines that come from those distribution mains to the water meter to the house. We do have some plastic pipe that was installed in the 80s and 90s and that. And what we've seen and what we're experiencing is failures in those pipes. We have areas like Heritage Heights or other places where we're coming back in and having to replace wholesale neighborhoods of the service lines, not the major transmission mains or the distribution mains that we have, because we don't have any of those that were plastic.
Got it. Thank you.
And just as a point, most PVC pipe is a deep-socketed bell and spigot product, so it allows for expansion and contraction. It's possible that many of those service lines are other materials, or they're solvent cemented where they didn't allow for that ground movement or that movement associated with temperature. So that's what the product looks like, and just to differentiate from what you typically may see in service lines.
Typically, PVC is not used in service lines.
We do have some cards, if you don't mind. Jeff Boschert?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the council. My name is Jeff Boschert. I'm president of the National Clay Pipe Institute. Clay pipe is utilized as a gravity flow sanitary sewer pipe material by 5 of the 6 largest cities in the United States. City of Phoenix is one of those areas. Clay pipe has served the city of Phoenix for well over 100 years. I believe there's somewhere on the order of 20 million feet installed in the ground and still in service. We do have a local manufacturer which provides jobs for local residents. This manufacturer not only supplies local projects, but projects all around the southwestern quadrant here in the United States. We are a fired ceramic. We have we're the longest lasting, most sustainable product for pipe materials that probably will ever be made. If possible action will be considered for this item, we would appreciate a similar opportunity to present on behalf of our clay pipe industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Greg Horn?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the subcommittee. I am Greg Horn. I'm Vice President in charge of technical services for the Ductile Iron Pipe Research Association, and appreciate this opportunity. The fact is that PVC pipe does have an opportunity to compete on every project in every municipality throughout the United States and Canada. Councilman Gates kind of hit the nail on the head when he asked about the people that comprise that make up the RFPs. Those are professional people who have education and experience and knowledge, and they're the ones who have the responsibility to make those decisions. The American Water Works Association that was referenced earlier has come out against procurement legislation and in favor of leaving those decisions to the people who have the responsibility to do so and the knowledge and expertise. This has come up in a half a dozen states where legislation has been lobbied to force municipalities to bid every pipe that is available, regardless of what their preferences are. And their preferences are based on their knowledge, their expertise, their education, and their experiences, and what is best in their professional judgment for the people that they serve. And we would also, should this go forward, like the opportunity to make a similar presentation on behalf of our industry. Thank you.
Thank you. James Emper?
Madam Secretary, Council.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I'll just hold it, yes. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm Jim Emper. I'm with U.S. Pipe and Foundry. We're our ductile pipe manufacturer. And I want to reiterate what Mr. Horn's words were. The decisions that are made for the city of Phoenix should be made by the city of Phoenix and what is best for the city of Phoenix. And I just don't feel that this widespread use of materials to make things more competitive will in fact make things more competitive. When I go out and buy a car, anybody goes out and buy a car, they don't want to buy the cheapest car. They want to buy the car that's going to be work for them or their family. And those decisions should be kept within the city of Phoenix. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeremy Haskins?
Madam Chair, Council, thank you for this opportunity. I'm a registered professional engineer here in Arizona. I work for a clay pipe manufacturer in Phoenix, 51st Avenue and Buckeye Road. As Jeff mentioned, we've been supplying pipe 50 years and into the Southwest. We appreciate an open forum, to talk pipe materials. I believe last time Unibel approached the city, it was in the form of a lawsuit. And I think that's where their consideration was last looked at 10, 15 years ago. So we appreciate an open forum to discuss pipe materials. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Romero Guzman?
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I want to also just ditto Greg's statements. I'm Romero Guzman. I work senior sales engineer with American Ductile Iron Pipe. And you asked an interesting question that said, what has changed with your material? And they never answered that question. So nothing has changed since 2000 or 1980 or what have you. Ductile iron pipe has been serviced in Phoenix for over hundreds of years, and in service cast iron pipe prior to ductile iron pipe has been in service for over a couple hundred years. So they stated that they've been in service over 60, and the same thing that these gentlemen state is that registered engineers and professionals specify what's best for their city, and all piping material has its place in the ground, and that should be allowed to be specified by that individual. So, thank you.
Thank you. John Nelson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. I look at this a little bit differently than everybody else because I was here as an engineer back in the 60s when we were dealing with some of the preliminary issues as we got going together on the council. And then from a city council standpoint, it has the responsibility of coming together with programs and plans that we could put together that would create an environment for the city of buying and securing equipment to put in the ground that would stay there and be there as long as we needed. And Madam Chairman, you mentioned a little bit in the beginning about the problems of putting pipe in the ground and having to replace it. That's the biggest problem that you can face at any one time if you look at where the pipes are, what's over them, and what happens when those pipes fail and you have to go in and replace them. You're tearing up streets, you're tearing up all the ancillary roadways, and you're disrupting the traffic in the neighborhoods and the communities. And if it's a major line on a major street, you got a major problem. So from that standpoint, and from my council years, we were dealing with this, and we were always dealing with the same thing. There's a tape out there called Blue Vinyl, and it shows the dramatic impact on our environment and the people that work in that industry. And it kills a lot of people and it harms a lot of people. I think I have a copy of that still at the house. And if I can, Madam Chairman, if you don't mind, I'll get it to you. But from that standpoint, I just want what's good for us. It's my taxes that pay for it, like everybody else's. I want it to go in the ground, to be there, stay there, and provide the service that I need, my family, and my great-grandkids now. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe this item is just for discussion and review today. We're not taking any action, but it is exposure for some new council members and a hot topic. I think it's interesting. I understand and I know for our irrigation, we always use that. Running things down to the barn, we use your pipe. But I have real concerns when it comes to the city. The terrain is quite different than most of the other cities in the world. Just the elevations that you have within the city boundaries is a challenge very often for things. And as former council member just stated, I think one of my big concerns always has been failure. When failure happens on a water line or a sewer line, and you have to dig up a mile of a major thoroughfare, you will hear from every neighbor within 500 feet on both sides. And the congestion and the safety concerns are very strong. I'm just concerned when you didn't tell me there were significant improvements in your product. I can fully believe in some areas this is probably very appropriate, but Phoenix is unique, whether it's our drastic range in temperatures, soil conditions, and the elevations, I think, present challenges. I welcome the input that you had here today, and I really appreciate you taking the time. But from my perspective alone, I'm not speaking for my fellow council members, you get what you pay for, and the consequences for taking the low bid on something, in my estimation, on something like this is too great. And I want to be assured that we have a quality product that's going to last for a long time, provide safe services, and our customers depend on us to deliver that, and I think it's important that we continue our current process. Councilman?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and obviously respect the, great to see John Nelson here, and we've talked about this before. That would be great if we had an engineer on the council now. Would be of great benefit, and respect the time that you all spent on this issue previously. And I think you raise a great concern, which is Arizona a place where we shouldn't use PVC pipe? And so I think we've got, as I look at your chart here, looks like we have lots of places we can go and determine that. Apache Junction, Avondale, Buckeye, Cave Creek, Chandler, Fort Apache, Fountain Hills, Gilbert, Goodyear, Mesa, Navajo Tribal Utility Authority, Page, Peoria, Pima County Wastewater Management, Scottsdale and Tucson all have PVC and sewer, and nearly all that looks like all those do on the water main side. So it looks like there's empirical data that we can look at. I mean, if that's the case, I couldn't agree more. I don't, we've had a lot of water main. Anyway, we don't have PVC, but we're having water mains torn up, and I think we just went through a long discussion about how we've got to replace all these other water lines. That's why we just had a water rate increase. So it's going to happen anyway. But if we look at these and say, yeah, they're clearly breaking quicker, then I would agree. But I think we need to at least, we have empirical data to look at. And to my point earlier, we have experts on these RFP panels who can look at an individual project and determine what the best material is to use. I'm surprised, this is new to me, I'm surprised that this was put in place, that we don't have open competition. So to my, in my thinking, the burden of proof should be on those that are keeping certain materials out. And if it is that it doesn't make sense for Arizona, then I would agree. But I feel like, that it's a good process, and I like this talk of an open forum on this issue. This is a place to do it, because let's remind ourselves how we got here. The state, there was an effort to preempt the city on this issue, and I think there's been quite a lot of that lately. So if, without opening that can of worms, so if we can have a good discussion here and make a determination at the city level, that makes a lot more sense to me, as opposed to the state preempting it.
Further- Vice Mayor?
Thank you. Since you did open that can of worms, I do think this is the appropriate venue to discuss the Phoenix water and sewer system. I am married to a former legislature, and I can tell you the amount of training they receive on these matters is slim to none. While none of us are experts like we have had in the past, we certainly spend a lot more time trying to understand the water system than our colleagues at the state legislature. It is a local decision. There are factors that are unique, at least to our region, if not to our city. And so we ought to look at what Tempe has done, what Mesa has done, and make sure we are doing the best thing for the taxpayers, looking at the life cycle of the investment. So I am glad that we are studying this at the Phoenix City Council and not at the Arizona legislature. So thank you to Councilman Gates for raising attention on it at the local level and not the state level.
I have one comment that my colleague, Councilman Gates, perked me. In looking at the municipalities, I would like to know the years that they were placed.
Yeah.
Or I would like to know the years that they were placed in the ground, and then I would like to know where there were some issues and the timing of them,
Yes.
the longevity of it.
Madam Chairman and Councilwoman Pastor, we can absolutely reach out to the communities that are identified here and get that information.
And the other comment that was made about low bid, I'm not a fan about low bid. And for me, I'm a fan of quality and good service. And when it means quality and good service, it also means a longevity of a product. And so I don't have that, I haven't fallen for that mindset in the sense of, I know we're trying to be economical and look at it, but I think when we go sometimes for a low bid, sometimes what happens is the product is not at the quality, and then we're investing more and more into it, and we end up paying what the medium bid or the high bid ended up being. So I think we have to look at that. And so
You want to bring this back in the
I'm
fall?
glad this is here.
Madam Chair, could I just make one comment?
Yes.
And I agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more, Councilwoman Pastor, on low bid. The beauty of PVC is it happens to be a low cost but highly durable and high performance material, which is why it continues to grow market share all over the world and in North America. So we're simply telling you, if you include us in the bid and you use our products, we can lower your costs and we can improve system performance. That's what we're saying. So it's not about low bid cheap. It's
Yeah.
about low bid high quality. That's the message we bring.
I just wanted to
Yeah, but just
put it out there
want
where
to
where
clarify
I
that
am.
because that point of view is often suggested and it's not
Okay.
our story.
That's fair.
Thank you.
I, from hearing the comments, believe that maybe this is something you could bring back to us in the fall and do a comparison study. I would also like an evaluation where we have the plastic pipe in service. How long's it been there? What's the breakage? And the durability versus cost. I don't think it's everywhere, so you'd have a comparison, I believe. So, and to invite the other members, manufacturers, the experts, people that you use on the panel, to give us an evaluation to explain circumstances, their experiences, and the other products that are out there, because this is one product. There are many products, I think, that probably serve this niche, and I think it's important that we review all of them. I'm not saying we're going to make a discussion, we're going to make big changes, but I think it's worthy, if it's been 10 years or more, for a look at it. See if we're still headed, because we are doing a major capital improvement project, and I think it's worthy of consideration. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for being here today and taking the time and coming back, and we'll probably see you again this fall. Staff will be in touch, and we'll update the process. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Takes us to item, I believe, 13, which is public comment. Call to the public, and Howard May, you have a microphone.
Good morning, members of the committee and Madam Chair. Congratulations on a few things. You got the light rail going up to Dunlap, and the good things coming from Prop 104, including the buses going eventually to go later. However, there are a few places where that will not happen because of the routes that go into Glendale, and I'm concerned about those not matching light rail, which will be make me move back to Phoenix. You're still having a problem with bikes on the light rail, and they still have not fixed the missing signs on 19th Avenue after the bus shelters got put back in. And I'm looking forward to some of the other things that Valley Metro has planned, including the technology side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's all the cards we have. Oh, wait, we have another. Give us your name and address.
I represent the American Medical Association here. We funded several medical licenses, and we put people through medical school, and we have $25 million to build another medical center. We feel it's not here, it's somewhere else, but we have the cash to build a new medical center. And when I'm just coming from a healthcare standpoint, when I see all this kind of a group in here under PVC pipe, I don't see health codes or city codes that deal with this in the building codes. And some people that were running the state of Arizona for a while, they raise those issues too. So if the cities can develop some kind of codes to deal with, because they're necessary and they're killing people right now.
Thank you. Okay. I think we have a list for future topics. Anybody need to add? I know, it's a heavy list. I'm thankful you don't have anything to add. Thank you, staff. I appreciate your time. We are adjourned.